Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to On the House, the Household Management Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with expert knowledge from professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Joustra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about dishwashing and the great dishwashing debate, whether to use the washing machine or to wash our dishes by hand. And to help us with that debate today, we're joined with Jennifer Chesak, who is a medical and science journalist. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great. So do you mind introducing yourself a bit so we get to know a bit more about who you are and why you're here today?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a medical and science journalist, and I am also an adjunct instructor and a fact checker for a lot of medical health articles. So that's what I do in a nutshell. And I recently wrote an article about whether we should be hand washing our dishes or using the dishwasher. And I looked at the differences between these two methods and which one is more environmentally friendly, which one gets your dishes cleaner, and things like that. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. And I imagine that being a medical and science journalist would mean that you get to learn about lots of different medical and science things and write lots of articles about different things.
Absolutely. I'm constantly learning new things, and that's what I love about my job, because I dig into different medical studies all the time, different scientific studies, and all of it's super fascinating to me. And I love being able to put it all together into an article that makes sense to the general public, of course.
Oh, that's amazing. And thank you for doing such great work. We're going to do a section that we call Have You Met Jennifer? And that's where we ask you some of your favorite things to get to know you a bit better. So our first thing we want to know is, what's your favorite book?
Wow, that is such a hard question because I'm a voracious reader, as you can see with my bookshelf back here. But I did pick out a few that I really love to mention. And so one is called In the Distance, and that's by Hernan Diaz. Hernan Diaz just recently won a Pulitzer for a different book, but that's my favorite book of his. Watership Down by Richard Adams. That's a childhood novel. Love it. Kitchens of the Great Midwest by J. Ryan Strattle. And Moral Disorder by Margaret Atwood. And then recently I just finished Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, another Pulitzer winner.
Gosh, that's quite a few books. And they seem to span quite a few different genres as well.
Yes, I read from all different genres. Just love a good narrative, good story.
Great. Yeah, we were admiring all your bookshelves beforehand, so good to know.
Thank you.
And what about a movie you've enjoyed recently?
So I haven't watched movies recently for some reason, but I've been watching several TV shows on streaming platforms. And of course, like everyone else, I'm heavy into Succession right now. I need to get caught up because I know it just wrapped up, but that's a good show for sure.
Yeah, I know my partner's also watching it, and he couldn't go on Twitter for a day because he wasn't caught up with it.
Yeah, you have to be careful so you don't get spoiled when you're looking online. So
I know. And do you listen to any podcasts?
Yeah. So I've been listening to several that are related to my book that's about to come out. And so some of the podcasts that I've been diving into are On the Rocks with Nate Callens, Modern Psychedelics with Lana Privick, The Light Within with Leslie Draffin, A Whole New Level, which is about metabolic health. It's super fascinating. The High Guide with April Pride, and Expanding Reality with Brandon Thomas. So that's just kind of a handful that I've been enjoying lately.
And so they all seem to be on one topic. What is that topic?
They are all, well, many of them cover different subjects, but the bulk of these cover psychedelics. So, which is something that I'm really passionate about and just recently wrote a book about. So.
Great. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So not going to dive into that. And do you have a role model?
I do. My mom is my absolute role model. So love her.
And why's that?
Well, I think she just conducts herself with a lot of grace and class, and in terms of just being kind to people and just living her life the way that she wants to live it. And I just really admire that about her.
That's lovely. Yeah, I also admire people who aren't afraid to be who they are and, actually do what they want and live life how they want.
Yes.
And what about a course that has inspired you? Have there been any?
I haven't taken a course lately, but I really do love the writing related courses at a literary nonprofit that's called The Porch. And that's located in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live, but they offer classes virtually as well. So I highly recommend it, especially to writers.
So, how do you define household management?
Yeah, managing a household is certainly a job that we all must do, whether you rent an apartment or you own a home. And I think of household management as just all of the little and big tasks or jobs that need to get done around the house, whether that's changing furnace filters, stocking the pantry with groceries, or doing a deep clean, or even just doing yard work. All of that is involved in household management. And I'm really grateful that I grew up in a household where I had regular tasks as a child that I was responsible for and had to treat those tasks like a job. And it was a way of not only pitching in with my family and stuff, but it really gave me a good education in household management and set me up for being able to adult well, I think.
That's interesting that you say that you're grateful for that, because I feel like a lot of people were very resentful for it, as kids at least.
I think, yeah, I certainly have heard from people who were resentful of having chores, but I definitely am the opposite because I can see that there are people out there who never had chores and never learned some of these tasks or, laundry, how to do laundry properly or how to cook. And I'm so grateful that I learned those things as a kid.
Definitely. And I think I see my mum especially, and also my dad a bit, in how I do a lot of the things. I do them in specific ways that my parents taught me. And I do it makes me think about them when I'm doing all my little chores.
Of course. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm constantly thinking about my mom when I'm cleaning or thinking about when I'm out in the yard doing gardening, which I'm really passionate about. I'm constantly thinking about my dad. How would he do this?
Mm. And what are some misconceptions about household management?
That's a good one. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that the labor of household management falls to women. And, that's just simply not true. Everyone in the household needs to pitch in. So I think even when men share some of these physical tasks that are being done around the house, whether that's cleaning or laundry, they still often turn to the woman if they're in a cis hetero partnership, of course, to do this emotional labor of figuring out what tasks need to be done, when and how. And I think that truly needs to change. Men need to be taking the initiative to know when the house is out of toilet paper or when furnace filters need to be changed or when the shower needs to be cleaned of mold or whatever. And, men shouldn't just be looking to their partners for instruction, essentially. They need to figure it out and get it done. So I think the misconception there is just that it should fall to the woman, and it really shouldn't.
Okay. But do you think it'd be easier if maybe just one partner in a couple, sort of knows everything? I'm not saying it has to be the woman or the man, or is it easier if you both share both it? Is it easier if you both share?
I think it makes sense to share the responsibilities, not only in doing the tasks, but also the emotional labor of figuring out what needs to be done. I think that needs to be shared. And it might be that if you're in a partnership with you're part of a couple, that you figure out which tasks are the ones that you manage. Doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to do that task, but maybe there's a person who's in charge of the cleaning schedule. Maybe there's a person who's in charge of the laundry schedule or whatever that might be. And then you share the tasks essentially.
Okay, that's a good option because, yeah, I find I'm not saying that my partner and I don't share our tasks, but I think both of us think that we both do the majority of the work.
I think that's a common thing in couples where, everyone thinks they're doing all the work or something like that. So I get it.
So I do like the idea of trying to share it out and actually mapping out what each of us are supposed to do or in charge of. And actually, funnily enough, one of my partner's main, I guess, chores thing he's in charge of is dishwashing. So what is dishwashing?
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that because my partner, my husband, he's typically in charge of the dishwashing too. It doesn't mean that he always has to do it, but I think he manages that really well. So that's good. So dishwashing can either be done by hand or via dishwasher. But the bottom line is that it's a good thing to do after every meal so that dishes don't pile up. So that's obviously why it's important. We don't want dirty dishes sitting on the counter and then attracting bugs, things like that, and stinking up the house. So, in our household, we typically try to weave dishwashing into our everyday life and tasks, and we have it so much set up that way that I barely think of dishwashing as a task anymore. It just happens.
Yeah, I think that that's the difference between my partner and I, which is that he does the dishes after every meal. I'll let things accumulate over the day, which maybe isn't the best practice, and we'll talk about practices later. And then it does become a chore because you have to, stand there and do all of the dishes for the whole day. But you also mentioned a little bit about why it's important, but do you mind elaborating a bit?
Sure. So in terms of, why, I love a clean house and I'm pretty much a stickler for that. So if I have a dirty kitchen, it's stressful to me. And so I think it can have an impact on your mental health if you have a dirty kitchen. It doesn't necessarily have to be spotless, but if you've got dirty dishes sitting out, there's clutter, your stress, it can create a stress for you. And then additionally, again, dirty dishes can attract bugs. So you might start attracting roaches or mice or other pests that you don't want in your home. And, it obviously depends on where you live, if there's more of a risk or not. But yeah, I think that's something that I'm very conscious of, is that I keep it clean because I don't want unwanted guests in my house.
And so even if you just left them out for a couple hours, that can attract pests?
I don't think there's a huge risk for it attracting pests if you don't have a pest problem already. If you're just leaving it out for a few hours, as you mentioned, you let the dishes accumulate throughout the day and then you do them all, in the evening or whatever, which is fine. And that's fine too. It's just more, we can't have it piling up for a week or days at a time, because that's when we start to have issues, I think, with unwanted guests in the house, creepy crawlers.
Yeah, fair enough. And so, if we want to make our, dishwashing better, what should we do? I guess do them regularly, at least once a day?
Definitely. I think a few practices that have helped me is when you're cooking. So when I'm cooking, I will hand wash a lot of the items that I use as I go. So if I use a pot or a pan or a colander or a knife or some type of utensil, I accumulate it for a little bit. And then as soon as I have a free moment in the kitchen, maybe my food is cooking in the oven or something like that, then I turn my attention to cleaning up those dishes that I used while I'm using that time of waiting for my meal to be done. So that's one thing that I do. And then I'm a stickler for cleaning up any kitchen mess before eating, which may sound silly, like is your dinner going to get cold? But if you are cleaning as you go while you're cooking, then that typically doesn't happen. And I love the idea of just being able to relax after dinner and not stress about the dishes other than the ones that you've just eaten off of. Those have to go back to the kitchen, or be put away. But yeah, I think that cleaning up the mess before eating is also a really great practice, that at least that I do. And then I will either hand wash the dishes or load up the dishwasher after every meal. So I take the dishes that we've used and then put them in the dishwasher. I'm also a stickler for emptying the dishwasher soon after it's done running, so that you always have the ability to reload it. And then you never have to worry about the fact that you might, because got a bunch of clean dishes in there, you don't want to load it with dirty dishes. So if it's empty, you can start loading it up. And so then you don't have dishes sitting on your counter. And then if you're using the dishwasher, another best practice, I think, especially if you're trying to be more environmentally friendly, is that you can use the normal setting rather than that heavy many dishwashers have like a heavy option. So you just use that normal setting, and you can even skip the dry setting or use a non like heat drying option, and that will help save energy as well if you're planning to be environmentally friendly.
Okay, so we have a dishwasher, but we don't really know, or I grew up with dishwashers and I don't understand all the different settings. And it was always my parents just said, press this button and make sure it's on this setting and then it's fine. So what are all the different, like why is there a heavy duty setting? What are all the different ones and what do they do?
Yeah, there's usually a heavy setting and a normal setting. So sometimes there's a light setting. It really depends on how fancy your dishwasher is. Mine's not that fancy, but yeah, if you turn it to heavy, it involves more energy and more water and a longer time. And then if you just use the normal setting, it's basically just a normal cycle. And so it uses a little bit less energy. So I'm not really sure why dishwashers have that heavier setting. Obviously, if you have heavily soiled dishes, that might be the case. But I rarely use that setting. I typically just go with that normal setting.
Okay. Yeah. So you also discussed the environmental impact of dishwashers and that, they can, using the heavy setting as opposed to the regular setting means that it uses more water and electricity. And how does that compare to hand washing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I did write about this. So my mom grew up I'm going to go back to the olden days. My mom grew up in rural North Dakota without running water. And that always sort of blows my mind that my mom grew up without running water. But she and her family members, to wash dishes, they had to carry water in a very large cream can from their water well and then bring it inside and heat it on their stove and then use that same water to wash all the dishes for a family of 7. And there was no opportunity for rinsing because they didn't have running water, of course. And so she told me that, by the time we got to the pots and pans, the water was pretty gross, is what she said. And then afterwards, they would haul that water out to a pig trough so that pigs could drink from it. And so, back then, I guarantee that she wasn't, as a hand washer, was not using more water than a dishwasher for sure. Most of the energy that was being used really just came from, good old fashioned elbow grease, right? So, but nowadays, when we hand wash dishes, we aren't exactly following those same practices, not that same painstaking method, right? So we typically and I'm guilty of this when I hand wash, I will typically use too much soap and way more water than necessary. And, you're using the sprayer and the high pressure to rinse the dishes rather than using the elbow grease. And so obviously, if you could use more elbow grease and less water and soap, it would be more environmentally friendly. But an analysis out of UCLA shows that hand washing actually uses more water per dish and per load than, if you're washing a load of dishes, hand washing them, than using the dishwasher. So, and that same analysis shows that dishwashers generate fewer greenhouse gas emissions. The additional water distribution and energy required to heat the water for hand washing is just a little bit harder on the environment, is what the research says. And then a small laboratory study out of the University of Michigan's School for Environment and Sustainability kind of backs up that info. The study compared typical hand washing practices, so typical machine use. So comparing the typical practices of hand washing to the typical practices that we would use to load the dishwasher and run the dishwasher. But if you were to wash 4 loads of dishes per week with 8 place settings per load, that would be a lot. That'd be like a large family. But if that's the case, and then over the course of 10 years, using the dishwasher would still generate less than half of the greenhouse gas emissions as hand washing would. So we would have much less in terms of greenhouse gases if we're using the dishwasher over that period of time.
Interesting. But what
Yeah.
about if you have a smaller family or you're running the dishwasher more frequently? Like, I remember growing up, there was only four of us, but I'm pretty sure we ran the machine once a day, rather than, 4 times a week. So that's 7 times. Does that sort of negate that, savings in or negate the environmental friendliness of it? Sorry.
Right. So, it's unclear. I don't have a direct comparison with a, smaller amount of dishes. I think obviously if people are loading up the dishwasher with just a few dishes every time they eat or every day, and it's not full and they're running it just to run it and get it done, certainly that could have more of an environmental impact than if we were to wait until the dishwasher is relatively full and then run it. It could go different ways depending on, as you were talking about, the size of your household, how many dishes you typically use, how often you're running that dishwasher. But I think if you were just running it a normal amount after filling up the dishwasher, then it's still more environmentally friendly than hand washing, especially if we're doing things like just squirting the soap on the dishes and then rinsing them underneath the running water. That's clearly not environmentally friendly.
Mm. But my mum, she lives on her own. She's got a dishwasher, but she very rarely uses it because
Mhm.
by the time she's filled it up, she has no dishes left, and it's been a week, and everything's really stuck onto the plates. So, if she wants to, improve her hand washing practices, do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, I think it's good if you have a double sink, so a double-sided sink, to fill up the sink with one side, fill up the sink with water, like sudsy water, and then have your other side also filled up as kind of a rinse bath for the dishes. So that would be a really great way to, be more environmentally friendly when hand washing dishes. And I certainly use that practice, and I grew up with that practice, which is great. But alternatively, if you don't have that double-sided sink, if you just have like a one tub sink kind of thing, you can buy a almost like a pan or a plastic tub, set it on your counter next to your sink, fill that up with water, and make that be your rinse bath. Because we don't necessarily need to run the faucet to rinse. You can just kind of dunk your dishes to get the suds off, essentially. So that can make it a little bit more environmentally friendly, and there's certainly no harm in that.
And after I've noticed that after I've rinsed quite a few plates in that sort of section of water, it gets a little bit cloudy. There's a little bit of stuff that's come into there. Do we need to change the water to make it more hygienic?
Sure, you may. It really just depends on the amount of stuff that is, congealing in the water and whatnot. But I think a good practice is to start washing your glassware first, and then silverware and plates. And then if you have cooking stuff like pots and pans or sauce spoons or whatever utensils that you were using, wash those and then the pots and pans as your last thing, because most of the grease that happens is going to be on the pots and pans. And so if you stick them into the water last, and you're fine, and most of the time you don't have to worry so much about the sanitation of your pots and pans because they get heated on the stove anyways. And so the sanitation kind of happens that way as well. Obviously you want them to be clean, but it's okay if it's not perfect, essentially.
Okay, great. And I've been in that situation where I had a really oily pan that I just washed, and then I washed some glasses, and every glass was covered in oil.
Right.
And then
Yeah,
I need to
that's
wash all of
frustrating.
the glasses again. And it was so frustrating.
Yeah, so it's the order of the things that you wash that can really help, for sure.
And what about comparing, dishwashers with hand washing in terms of sanitation?
Yeah, so I think that, well, I guess I'm going to go back to a little story that I also included in my article about this. I'll never forget, I was in grad school and I had just moved in. I had moved to Washington, D.C., and I had found a roommate on Craigslist. Essentially, this guy owned a house and he was looking for a renter. So I rented a room from him. And when I had finished eating dinner on my first night there, I began washing my plate and fork in the sink just because I was, the only person who had eaten. Why put it? I felt like, why put it in the dishwasher? And he kind of freaked out, which was funny to me. He was adamant that all dishes had to go in the dishwasher for sanitizing. And I was shocked because I was shocked that he cared about such a thing, because I had spent all day after I had just moved in. I'd, been scrubbing his kitchen because it was pretty gross. I was surprised that he cared about this sanitation. But it turns out he wasn't wrong. He was right. The dishwasher does in fact clean the dishes better or more. And an Energy Star certified dishwasher will get the water temperature to at least 60 degrees Celsius. And that temperature in the sink would obviously scald your hands. So we just get much hotter water in the dishwasher, which is good for sanitizing. So, obviously if you were in a hand washing situation, you could wear rubber gloves and turn up the heat, but we can only get most water heaters will only go to 48 degrees Celsius. So not quite that 60 degrees Celsius that a dishwasher will get to. So to actually sanitize dishes, the National Sanitization Foundation says our home dishwashers should reach a final rinse cycle of at least 65. And so that helps to sanitize. But, the water inside most of our machines gets much hotter than what we can produce from the tap. And that's just the way that dishwashers function. So certainly better at killing germs if we stick them in the dishwasher.
And what about in terms of cleaning things effectively? Because something I've noticed is that, I'll pull a plate out of the dishwasher and it'll still have bits of food on it. So then do I wash the dish and then put it in the dishwasher? Seems a bit, doing the same thing twice. Inefficient.
Right. It's inefficient to do that. And it's actually not great for our dishwashers. Our dishwashers stop functioning at the same level if we're rinsing the dishes before we put them in. And so, this was really fascinating when I was researching this piece that I wrote about this. But, yes, dishwashers are clearly not great for delicate glassware and things like that. So sometimes it's best to just, wash those by hand. But, when you're, I'm going to start over. Sorry. Kind of lost where I was. Let's see here. Okay. So I'll just start in. So, no, we don't really need to wash or rinse the dishes before they go in the dishwasher. So, there's some statistics about this. And most people do actually rinse their dishes before they go into the dishwasher. About 90% of people do some level of rinsing before they load the dishwasher. But Consumer Reports says that rinsing is not a great idea, and that's only to say if your dishwasher unless your dishwasher is totally ancient, you don't need to do the rinsing, and that's because machines that have been sold in roughly the last decade, I'll even go back to saying about, 2010. If you've got a dishwasher that's in your home after 2010, if it's a model from 2010 or later, then you should definitely not be rinsing your dishes before putting them in the dishwasher. And that's because dishwashers nowadays have what's called a soil sensor, and that those soil sensors check for debris in the cloudy water. So if we are pre-rinsing our dishes in the sink, then the dishwasher doesn't do as good of a job. And that can leave your dishes with more stuck on food or stains. And of course, like you said, it's not very efficient or effective in terms of time. And it's not very environmentally friendly if we're first rinsing them in the sink and then putting them in the dishwasher and running more water. So pre-rinsing negatively impacts the machine's performance. And Another factor is that detergent enzymes, so independent of the dishwasher, the type of detergent that you're using, these detergents clean because they have enzymes in them. And these enzymes are designed to essentially cling to the food buildup. And that's how dishes get clean. So we don't want to interrupt that enzyme cleaning action by pre-rinsing. So if you have dishes that still have food on them, like maybe you didn't finish all your dinner or whatever you were eating, most manufacturers of dishwashers nowadays recommend scrape those leftover chunks into your trash bin or garbage disposal, or hey, put them in your compost pile if they're a good fit for that. And then just do kind of a quick scrape and then load them into the dishwasher.
So I've been to friends' houses where they've done that, but then there's sometimes food left on the plate. So what's causing that?
It could be a less effective dishwasher. Not every model is super great. So if you're noticing that, it might be time for a dishwasher upgrade. My dishwasher is from 2010, and I do notice this sometimes, and it's really frustrating. And I just haven't bit the bullet to buy a new appliance yet. But another thing that really helps is, and we kind of forget about this, but we have to clean that filter. So in the bottom of the most dishwashers, sometimes the filter's located elsewhere, but typically in the bottom of it, if you pull out the racks and you can reach into the bottom, and you'll see that food has accumulated there. So if we don't clean that filter regularly, then that lands on all the dishes and then gets stuck during that dishwashing process. So it's a great idea to just, once a month, maybe twice a month, reach down in there and kind of scrub it out, especially if you notice that filter is getting a little grimy.
I can't imagine how gross it would be if you've never checked it and, you pull out.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it can be really gross. I think we let ours go for, too long one time, and it definitely got gross to clean it out for sure. Didn't smell great.
Do it regularly so you don't have to deal with something that's really, really gross.
You don't have to be grossed out. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Another problem that I found with dishwashers is that it leaves like a film on the glasses, sort of like a cloudy film, and it kind of feels, I don't know, like it doesn't feel nice. Do you know what's causing that? Do you know how we can change that? Or is that just, I guess, a fact of life?
I think it's kind of a fact of life until we get better dishwashers. Sometimes it's a little bit of a residue from the soap that I think does that. So if it's becoming a problem for you, you can try to switch your dish detergent, whether, maybe switch to pods rather than the liquid dish detergent. Just a little trial and error to see what works best with your dishwasher.
And you also mentioned that, delicate glassware shouldn't go in the washing machine or dishwashing machine. What other things shouldn't go in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I typically don't put delicate glassware because it could break just based on all of the water whooshing around and a little jostling of the dishes. So don't put really delicate glassware. Your typical glassware is fine. And if something that you're not attached to, certainly go into the dishwasher. But I also avoid putting pots and pans in the dishwasher. A lot of pots and pans are not manufactured for dishwasher action, and so it's best to keep those out. For example, I use some ceramic dishware or ceramic pots and pans that I love, and they just cannot go into the dishwasher. But the other thing is, I don't love having my pots and pans in the dishwasher and waiting for me to run it when I want to cook later in the day, so I typically just hand wash those items or anything I use to cook with. And I also avoid putting my good knives in the dishwasher because it can lead to they can become dull that way from the detergent. So I typically hand wash those as well.
Okay, so we still need to do some dishwashing, but maybe just not quite as much.
Not quite as much, yes, absolutely, but a little bit here and there for sure.
And just the hard stuff too.
Yes, just the hard stuff, right? That seems unfair, right? I have to wash my pots and pans, but everything else can go in.
I know. Washing a glass, that's easy. I can do that.
Yes.
Forks, that's fine. A pan, I hate those.
I know. It's not fun.
And that sort of is also our last question, which is some people like washing dishes by hand. They find it sort of therapeutic. Are there any, psychological benefits associated with washing dishes by hand?
Yeah. So, in terms of hand washing being a therapeutic experience, absolutely. As can other household chores. So, whether you're weeding your vegetable or flower beds, or mowing or cleaning, mowing the lawn, cleaning the house, folding laundry, there's actually some science behind this as to why these things could feel a little bit therapeutic. So these are all somewhat mundane tasks that don't require us to have deep thought about what we're doing. And what's really cool about that is this makes your mind free to ruminate or sort of internally think, which is really important for our well being, as well as for if you have creative pursuits, like I'm a writer. So, this can be beneficial for your creativity. So, and I'll give you a few examples. So we've all had that experience of getting a great idea about something, whether it's a project you're working on, or maybe it's how to deal with a certain life problem that you've been kind of mulling over. These things typically happen, these great ideas typically happen when we're not directly working on the project or focusing on the problem. And, for example, I get some of my best ideas for my writing when I'm out running, or maybe I'm taking a shower. So, that's just a couple examples. But the reason for this, as I mentioned, there's some science behind this. The reason is that we have a network of brain regions, and this network works together to form what is called our default mode network, and we all have it. But the default mode network is active when we're thinking about our lives, or you're thinking about your past in terms of memories, or thinking about what you hope for your future, or just thinking about yourself in general, your sense of self a little bit. So that's when the default mode network is active. And it's not active when you're doing tasks that require, much deeper thinking, like if we're, answering a difficult work email or filing our taxes. And it's not active when we're focused on the external world, like if we're scrolling through social media and looking at other people's posts. So it's really great to activate that default mode network. And again, this can be beneficial for your well-being or creative pursuits. But an activity like hand washing gives us that opportunity to really activate the default mode network. Whereas, if you're sitting down and watching TV, it's not active. So I really love tasks like that get me to I can have like my little daydream time, and that's very therapeutic for people. People don't realize that.
That's so interesting.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, but this is also true even if you have a dishwasher, and so you're not hand washing. Let's say you're loading the dishwasher up. Loading and unloading is also a little bit of time where you can, be ruminating on something. You don't have to actually be thinking about loading the dishwasher. We do it sort of automatically. And so you still gain some of those benefits. I think about as a child, one of my chores was emptying the dishwasher. And it was something that I enjoyed because I could just kind of like daydream a little bit. And again, this has benefits for your well-being. So.
Okay, so just shifting the sort of therapeutic thinking mode from one activity to another one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And yes, I definitely find I have great thinking time when I'm going for a run or when I'm in the shower.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because then you're not near your laptop or a notebook to write down your ideas. So
I know. Or when I'm driving and I'm like, I can't stop driving.
Right, I know. Yeah, but there's science behind it, and that's actually a really great tip that I have as a writer is if you're stuck on something or whatever creative piece that you're working on, get out, go for a run, go weed your garden, go do the dishes, do whatever you got to do, get away from your laptop, and it will come to you. And then you got to get back to your laptop eventually, but
Just make sure if you're driving somewhere, you can stop quickly.
Absolutely, yes.
And so in your own life, in your own house, what's a practice you do to manage cleanup in your kitchen?
Yeah. So I think just this practice that both my husband and I do of really just clean as you go. So again, if I'm cooking and I finish using a pan or a knife, I might wash it immediately, or I might, let it pile up by the sink. And then as soon as I'm ready to, the food's in the oven, or, I have a little bit of downtime in between cooking tasks, then I will go ahead and wash up those dishes that I was using, essentially the pots and pans or utensils that I was using during my cooking time. Another thing that we do in our household, if one of us is cooking, then the other one is coming in to do that sort of cleanup as we go. And it's a little bit of teamwork, but it's a really great practice to get into if you can.
Something that my partner and I like doing is he'll put the dishes away and I'll clean the dishes because I'm really particular about how the dishes are cleaned. But I really hate putting dishes away for some reason.
Sure.
So we have this like teamwork going where we're doing the things that we both like doing.
Yeah. And my husband typically likes to hand wash these things and while I'm cooking, and I love to cook. So it actually works out really well. So if you can find those things that you either have a passion for or you're good at, and you split up the tasks, then it is a really great kitchen teamwork situation going on.
Great. And are there any challenges to, teaming up or cleaning as you go?
Yeah, I think for myself, if I were in the kitchen alone, I'm not a great multitasker. So I like to focus on one thing at a time. So if I'm cooking and then I turn my attention to cleaning the dishes, I might burn my dinner. So it's best if I have my husband in the kitchen with me doing that cleanup work while I'm cooking or something like that. So that's a challenge for me, is the multitasking.
Yeah, the other thing I find is I'll clean something and I'm like, oh, I was going to use that to stir. Now
Right.
I've got to clean it again.
Yes, I've had that happen with my husband too. He'll see that I've set something down and then he'll take it, and I'm like, I was using that.
Yes, but still better, I guess, than not cleaning at all.
Absolutely, yes.
Was there anything that we've missed today that you wanted to touch on?
Um, let's see. I think, just going back to this idea of this practice I have of cleaning as I go, I think one of the things that I really love about doing that is that, we never end up with a messy kitchen while we're cooking, or after we're done. And we never have this feeling of needing to deal with the big mess after eating, which I think can just be sort of stressful. You want to sit down and you want to enjoy your dinner. And so, but the other thing that it really, helps me be good about is I'm much more intentional about the items that I use while cooking, rather than grabbing all these different pots and pans that I don't need, or extra utensils after I've set one down and then I grab another. I'm much more intentional about using a few dishes as possible while I'm cooking, because we are going to clean them up before we sit down to eat.
Yes, I'm guilty of using more dishes than I really need.
Me too.
And what about the thing that I think, as I said before, the thing I really dislike doing is putting the dishes away after they've been cleaned. Do you have any tips there on how to make it more enjoyable? Or because the other thing is that tends to take over the rest of the kitchen because they're all drying there.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, to make something more enjoyable, you can do something called habit stacking. So, for example, when I really love using my stationary rowing machine, right? And so it's exercise. And so it's obviously sometimes we can be unmotivated for exercise. But I typically, when I'm on the rowing machine, I will either listen to a podcast or an audiobook. And so that's sort of a reward for me while I'm, doing this physical activity, right? And so often, if I'm getting frustrated about my motivation, like maybe I don't want to do exercise that day, I just think about what I get to listen to while I row. So and that will get me on that rowing machine. But the other thing is that, so with we can do the same thing with these tasks, these chores that we don't necessarily love to do all the time. Like I really hate folding and putting away laundry. So I'm like you don't like putting away the dishes. That doesn't bother me, but putting away laundry, I do it. But I will often listen to something that entertains me, or maybe I'll talk to my mom on the phone and we'll just be gabbing while I'm folding laundry. So that habit stacking can help you tackle a chore that you don't necessarily like to do, especially if you get to do an activity that you like to do, whether that's talking on the phone or listening to something that makes the chore feel less like a chore.
My mom's going to be getting a lot of phone calls then.
Yes, my mom does, for sure.
What are they there for except to talk to you while you're doing dishes?
Absolutely.
So thank you. We'll move on to the open mic section. That's where you get to talk about something that you're passionate about that doesn't necessarily have to be related to today's topic. And today we're going to be talking about something really special. Do you mind explaining what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So I wrote a book. It's called the Psilocybin Handbook for Women: How Magic Mushrooms, Psychedelic Therapy, and Microdosing Can Benefit Your Mental, Physical, and Spiritual Health. And so if anyone has not heard of psilocybin, that is what magic mushrooms are. And so, yeah, that's what I would love to talk about, is a little bit about the book and the content of it and why people might be interested.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. And it's a mouthful of a title.
I know. So I just call it for short the Psilocybin Handbook for Women, although a lot of people have trouble pronouncing that word, myself included. My tongue trips over it a bit.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and say that. I'm just going to call them magic mushrooms.
That's fine.
So yeah, please. How did you get into this topic?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. There's a lot of books out there on psychedelics, but there's a lot of books on psychedelics and also psilocybin specifically, but none of these books that are out there now really look at psilocybin through the lens of women's health. So I really wanted to focus on that as a topic related to psilocybin. And part of the reason for that is because women's health often gets forgotten about. We were left out, women were left out of early stage clinical trials in the United States until about the 1990s. And so a lot of medical research has just treated men and women, or female and male bodies is how I should say it, treated them as the same when they're absolutely not. Clearly, women have menstrual cycles. And so I think it's just really important to, when we're exploring a health topic, and of course, right now, there's all this information coming out about psychedelics as we have all of this new research happening right now. And it's really important to consider that the differences between the male body and the female body. So that's kind of the gist behind the book.
Interesting. And how does psilocybin affect women's bodies or female bodies as opposed to male bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, some of the concepts are going to still be the same. So, what actually happens in the brain during a psilocybin trip, like a journey on psilocybin, or if people are microdosing, some of that is similar. However, we do, obviously, people who are assigned female at birth they menstruate typically, and not everyone, because, for example, I had a hysterectomy and I no longer menstruate, but I did at one point in time. And so I think it's really fascinating. We're coming out with there are some new case studies that have come out and anecdotal reports showing that psilocybin may actually help regulate the menstrual cycle. And that's simply just because we have menstrual cycles, and the menstrual cycle occurs along what's called the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And then we also everyone has a stress response, right? And that occurs along the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So in women, these two axes overlap. And so one can affect the other. If we have a lot of stress in our lives, that can impact the menstrual cycle. And then the menstrual cycle itself can cause stress on the body. And so it's really fascinating because when you use psilocybin, it activates your serotonin receptors, and the serotonin receptors are along that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So it can definitely impact the menstrual cycle. Researchers are still trying to figure out all of the exact mechanisms of this, or why it's happening and how it's happening. But it's certainly super interesting that we're starting to get some of this research coming out now.
That's so interesting. So it helps to regulate the menstrual cycle.
Yeah. So what I've heard from some researchers at Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic consciousness research or something like that is the full title. I can't quite come up with right now, but they did some case studies with some women who had tried psychedelics. And there were 3 women. 2 of the women used psilocybin, and one of them had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is PCOS for short, and another had premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is PMDD for short. And both of those women had irregular menstrual cycles or dysregulation in their menstrual cycles. And after taking psilocybin, they found that their menstrual cycle came a little early, and it helped to get them back more on a regular track. So again, we need more research about this, but it's certainly super fascinating about all of the potential that's there to help women with these various conditions that they have. And so, for example, in chapter 11 of the book, which was like the beast chapter, it took me forever to write. And I kept thinking, when is this chapter going to be over? But in that chapter, I look at all of the research that we have so far on psilocybin and its potential role to help with different conditions, specifically conditions that either only affect people assigned female at birth, or that disproportionately affect them, or affect us in different ways. So an example of a condition that affects women in a different way than it would affect men would be, this isn't really a condition, but if someone is smoking cigarettes and they want to stop smoking, they want to quit smoking, it's different for women than it is for men. And that is simply because women have different nicotine receptors. And so there's all these products out there for smoking cessation, and they are targeted for nicotine receptors, but they don't work as effectively in women. But psilocybin is now being studied as something that may help people quit smoking. So it's just really fascinating when you start to look at the differences between men and women with different conditions, and then looking at the research that has come out so far regarding psilocybin. I just find the topic extremely fascinating.
That's so interesting. I'd love to learn more. I'm going to have to go and find your book. So has it been
Thank
published
you.
yet?
No, it comes out next week. So it comes out on June 6th, and I'm really excited about it. And it's available anywhere books are sold. So, you can go to your local bookstore and get it. And I always encourage people to support independent bookstores, but it's about to be published. It's about to come out into the world, and I'm just so excited.
Great. I'm excited. I found this topic really interesting. I've heard research before about depression and psilocybin. So I'd love to see how it affects, different bodies in different ways.
Absolutely. And I can talk briefly about the way that it helps in the brain for things like depression, anxiety, and whatnot. There's researchers have come up with this model to describe what sort of happens. And the model is called REBUS, REBUS, and it stands for Relaxed Beliefs Under Psychedelics. So in normal states of consciousness, our belief systems are pretty rigid. And what I mean by belief systems are the things that you think about yourself or how the world operates. Those are our belief systems. And when we're kids, those belief systems are very flexible and malleable. But as we get older, into adulthood, they become much more rigid. And then what that does, it prevents us from understanding ourselves or the world in a new way. So this Rebus model, they have a great analogy. These researchers created this great analogy for how psychedelics really help us. So if you think about a normal state of consciousness like you and I are in right now, then our minds are kind of frozen. That sounds silly, but it's like if we think about a pond that's frozen, got frozen water, right? And then if you try to give it new input, so if I was trying to gain a new belief about myself, and I thought of that belief as a rock or a pebble or a ball that I'm dropping onto this frozen pond, it doesn't gain entry. It just hits the surface, right? Maybe it cracks the surface a tiny bit, but it doesn't do anything. Now, when we're on psychedelics and psilocybin included, then that belief system or our minds are more like a thawed pond, just regular old water. And so if you were to take that belief that you're trying to gain entry into your mind, and you drop that pebble or that rock or that ball onto the pond, it gains entry and it creates a ripple effect. So it can, whatever belief is that you're trying to grasp, it will stick. And so you can see how if you have negative beliefs about yourself, or you have depression or anxiety, that how this could potentially help. So I just kind of wanted to explain that to give people the nutshell version, or the Cliff Notes version, of what psilocybin does in the brain.
Great, thank you. Because I've listened to a few podcasts about it, and none of them have explained how it really works in the brain. They've all say, "Oh, it's this amazing drug that can help people," but they don't really go into how it works. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I do have a whole chapter about that, digging into that
Perfect
science on the brain. It was fascinating.
Great. So other than buying your book, if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, so I keep it simple on all the social media channels. I am at Jen Chesak, so at JenChesak. You can also find me on my website, which is jenniferchesak.com.
Great, thank you. And we'll make sure that the links for those are in our show notes so people can find them. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Great. You've been listening to On the House, produced by the Household Management Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and any other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, sharing, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people to find it so we can grow and continue to bring you quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, hm.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Joustra. Thanks for tuning in.